Hello, I'm Roberta Winters, President of the League of Women Voters of Radnor Township. Today, I wish to share with you the 2014 process by which the ward lines were drawn in Radnor Township and the behind-the-scenes effort that determined whom you would have been and will be electing to serve you as commissioners. For decades, the League of Women Voters have advocated for redistricting reform. We all know that gerrymandering is a problem in the United States, in Pennsylvania, and even right here locally. However, what happens in Radnor is frequently under the radar. It is often quite complicated and sometimes contentious. That's the reason why we're doing a series of programs entitled Gerrymandering. It's local. Municipal boundaries are to be redrawn every 10 years as a result of census data. Thus, accurate counts of everyone, everywhere is very important to our township. These numbers are not only fundamental for determining our ward lines, but also for significant funding. The local redistricting process is covered by Article 9, Section 11 of the Pennsylvania Constitution, which states that within a year of the census, each municipality having a governing body not entirely at large shall be reapportioned by its governing body, or as shall otherwise be provided by uniform law, into districts which shall be composed of compact and contiguous territory as nearly equal in population as practicable. Radnor's redistricting plan, once proposed, is adopted by an ordinance by the entire Board of Commissioners. Today, I am pleased to have with me as our guest 3 individuals who were instrumental in the 2014 redistricting of Radnor's 7 wards. I have with me Elaine Schaefer, former president of the Board of Commissioners at that time, who represented the 4th Ward. Later, we'll hear from Don Curley, 6th Ward Commissioner at that time, and John Nagel, then and now our 5th Ward Commissioner. We are fortunate to have such a distinguished panel with us today. I'd like to begin with Elaine. Welcome, Elaine.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me, and it's always a pleasure to speak with you, Roberta.
As you realize, Elaine, Radnor was overdue in redistricting when you were serving as the Commissioner Chair. And in spite of the requirement to do so every 10 years, it was not finalized any time after 1993. So I think we have a map of what the wards look like. Knowing that redistricting was needed, what do you recall doing?
Well, first let me say that yes, you're absolutely right. It was completely overdue. When I came into office in 2010, we had a very challenging period of transition in Radnor government. And we had a lot of changes to put in place and a lot on our plate, which we did. Which took a chunk of time. Mm-hmm. And redistricting was on the list of very important things to tackle, but it wasn't on the top. And about 3 years into my term, we got to that on the list. And our main goal was to try to do this in a neutral way that would not be perceived as gerrymandering, and where we could cleanly redistrict this based on the numbers and the edicts that we needed to follow. So I had been familiar with the story of Amanda Holt during this time. She is a woman, a mathematician and a pianist, who had challenged the 2012 state redistricting plan and taken it all the way to the Supreme Court and got it overturned by making her own map. She was sort of a hobbyist cartographer, and she drew maps that made more sense than the ones that the legislature presented, so they sent it back and had them redraw them. So, of course, I thought that was very impressive. I followed that whole story as it was happening. And then I believe I saw her speak at a league luncheon a year or two later. And again, very impressed by this woman. So when it came time for us to do this, I approached our township manager, Bob Sinkowski, and I said, I told him the story of this woman. I said, why don't you give her a call and see if she does this for townships? Wouldn't that be great to start this process off with this neutral person who knows nothing about anything, drawing these maps based on math and cartography and, what we're supposed to be using as guides. So he did. he called her up. He said, "Do you do this?" And she said, "I do now."
Well, that's great, because we just spoke to Amanda last week in our It's Gerrymandering workshop here with Channel 21. So once you had Amanda here, did you then form a subcommittee to do the work with Amanda?
Actually, she really did it on the first version on her own. We gave her all the information she needed. She worked actually with staff to get the stats, to get the demographics, to get the maps and the GIS work. And then she came back with a map, which the board as a whole took some time looking at, and it did have some issues that were problematic. And that's the point where we, as a board, said, we need to work a little bit more with Amanda to iron out some of these difficulties. But it was too cumbersome to work as a whole, so we appointed a subcommittee. And that was really populated by who volunteered. We wanted to make it bipartisan for sure, but at that point, it was more a question of who has the experience, who has the time right now to take this on, because it's a time-consuming process, and who's willing to do it. And so Bill Spingler and John Nagel and Don Curley stepped up to work with Amanda to come up with some other tweaks to what she had produced.
Well, thank you, Elaine. That really sets the stage for our next group of panelists, who are Don Curley, who is on the committee, along with John Nagel. And I'm sure they'll give us more food for thought, so you can come back and tell us even more.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Gerrymandering, It's Local, is back again with the two commissioners who served on the subcommittee to redraw the ward maps for Radnor Township in 2014. We are delighted to have Don Curley, former 6th Ward Commissioner, and John Nagel, then and now 5th Ward Commissioner. Welcome, gentlemen. I'd like to begin by showing you what the wards look like when you begin. You'll see the boundaries of the 7 wards. Notice that they're color-coded and broken up by other lines that show numbers, and those are some of those census blocks that were used to help you determine populations. Now, Don, as someone who's seen a lot of changes in Radnor during your time as a commissioner, do you recall some of those initial meetings of the subcommittee?
Yes, I do. We talked about all the things typically associated with this type of activity.
Legally, I know there are some things you have to do with drawing lines, like you have to maintain the legislative and congressional districts, and you need to look at physical boundaries like roads and streams, and you also have to look at those block lines with the numbers of people in each of those spaces. Mm-hmm. Were there other guidelines that you agreed to also?
Yeah, I think we generally agreed to, obviously we want to look for natural boundaries. We want to look for there are some man-made boundaries that make sense. Obviously, you don't want to concentrate ethnicity. You don't want to concentrate party registration. So my recollection is that the attributes that are desirable were the ones that we talked about. I don't know that we achieved the outcome. I voted against the plan because I didn't think we did, but we didn't have difficulty identifying the attributes that we needed to have as part of our decision-making process.
John, do you recall any of the other things that you seemed to agree on?
Well, one of the things we had some, I'll call them goals. For example, we wanted to divide the dorms at the 3 colleges, 4 colleges, so they weren't concentrated, because under the old map we had large blocks of students, and they typically do not vote except in presidential elections. So we wanted to spread them out so that the representation for the ward was more uniform. I mean, 1 or 2 of the wards had a third of the number of real voters, if you will, as some of the other wards. And we tried to maintain neighborhoods, not break up neighborhoods to a degree, and we tried to stay close to the old ward boundaries if we could also.
So, do you remember what Amanda Holt exactly did for you, Don?
Yes, it's my recollection is that Amanda came in, she provided draft boundary lines, draft wards, and none of them were acceptable to the subcommittee.
Right.
Because they had a variety of Achilles heels, the biggest of which was 2 of the commissioners would no longer have lived in the ward that they were elected to represent. I don't know that that's against any type of rule. I don't know. I think you probably can do that. None of us were comfortable that that was a prudent thing, a prudent way to change the registry of the voter lines.
So Amanda, if we looked at proposed ward boundaries, which was originally slide 6 here on your PowerPoint, Amanda drew an initial map based solely on population and the State House districts, and that was a problem because the commissioners weren't in their wards in which they were serving. Is that right, John?
Right, and there's a mechanism in the charter to handle that, but it causes a lot of turmoil for the voters more than anything. The other thing, Amanda had really violated quite a few of the rules. Now, we didn't share those rules with her. We wanted to see what's the pure map, if you will, because she had recently been the one that did the maps that we used to challenge Pennsylvania and win. So we just basically stayed hands off. But once we got that first map in front of us, we were able to talk to her about the different options.
Well, and I think those census blocks are really important. And I think when people look at the maps, they don't understand what those are like. And so there's a census block picture that you showed to the public when you did the presentation. Right. And it has numbers. And what do those numbers mean, John?
Numbers of people in that block.
So if you're looking at this map that was on the...
It's important to understand. Redistricting is not done based on number of voters. It's done based on population. So here, when, for example, if I had been able to take the area that is Montrose Village, because one of the problems I personally had was 5-1 was very small. But the way this is drawn, I couldn't do that. And then this is a big apartment house. So there was no way to cut it up to allow us.
Because of those census blocks, which are predetermined before you ever see it.
Right. And in fact, I think in the next year or so, we probably should spend some time talking to the Census Bureau. Because there are some, like here, there's a stream that goes across, so it could have been
cut a different way.
So I had a particular problem in the 5th Ward where 5-1 is a very small precinct, and I wanted to expand. However, because of the way the population block is drawn here, you have the large apartment house, but you also have the condos that are here, and the condos would have been a nice addition, but they're all in the same census block, so I couldn't do it. And there is actually a natural boundary there, so I'm hoping we can talk to the census people and see if we can get some of the blocks adjusted.
Well, that's hopeful then. We may be able to change some things so our wards will look different in the future. And I also understand the problem with the map that Amanda drew because incumbents want to maintain their seats. And sometimes ward lines are drawn to help protect incumbents, although it may not provide for the most competitive elections.
Well, in this case, it really wasn't, I wouldn't say it was that. We were more concerned about just the upset, the turmoil.
Well, I felt that the line was part of why I voted against it. I stated this publicly at the meeting when I voted against it. Part of why I believe it was drawn was to make it hard for Luke Clark to win the next election. So, is what it is. John felt otherwise. Obviously, he voted the way he voted, but there were elements of that concerned me, which is why I voted against it.
And I think that partisanship question is always an area that we need to look at as the League of Women Voters.
Well, that's why I'm very supportive of trying to go to a different method with a Citizens Commission or something like that.
Because there's always a lot of horse trading and negotiations going on. And I know that you eventually settled on slide 8 that you showed, which is called Proposed Ward Map. And you can see the population areas there and how they were basically somewhat consistent. And actually you showed a map here and a chart that showed that you did look at populations. And if you look at slide 10, you will see when you decided between one map or another, which was option 4 or 5C, the final one, you look specifically at how close they were in population to each other, even though, as Don said, it looked like they gave a partisan advantage to someone.
Yeah, and there were, so this this is accurate. This is a fact. Nobody's contesting that. But there were, inside of that, there were problems that for me made it unable to support it. I mean, particularly I had it, if you look at the 6th ward, there was, let's say there's something like 4,500 people in the 6th ward. 2,300 of them, plus or minus, went to the 3rd ward. So 2,300 people voted in the 3rd ward election. They got the 6th ward commissioner. 2,300 people voted in the 6th ward. They got the, there was an election cycle. About 2,300 people missed an election cycle. So that is one key element, but it's not the only key element. There are other elements that we have to consider when we draw these lines.
Yeah, and there's another example of partisanship, since the Democrats had the majority, was we came down to 2 possibilities, one of which significantly affected the 6th ward, and one would significantly affect the 1st ward. The 1st ward had a Democratic commissioner, the 6th ward had a Republican commissioner. So what do you think we did? Yeah,
Way it worked.
the way it worked.
And I think, Don, you must have felt a little outnumbered because there were 2 Democrats and you were the only Republican.
Yeah, there were elements of that. Now, we all get along fine. We got along fine then.
Yeah.
So that isn't really the issue. Mostly it was, I did not think, so to pretend that this was nonpartisan would be silly. Okay,
Right.
So my advice isn't pretend my advice is not, let's find a way to make it nonpartisan. It's let's be aware of how the partisanship can be in it. And then let's have groups like yours providing oversight. And then if you see something that is inconsistent, you can raise that flag and communicate it to the community. Democracy in Radnor, we're still here. We survived that.
Yeah.
So we'll survive more. But it,
And
it is
Luke
one of,
won.
and Luke won also. He worked very hard and he won.
He
Good
did.
candidate. So the takeaway from me was not, boy, John was wrong. He should have voted a different way.
Yeah.
The takeaway was, it would have been better, the kind of conversations we were having in private, quite frank conversations in private, it would have been better for us to have been able to have those in a public forum. We didn't need a moderator. All we needed was people there to say whether they liked it or not. And then if they liked what I said, they could tell John. If they liked what John said, they could tell me. I feel like that was the stage that we missed. We kind of delivered the final product, and then we had an up-down, at a public meeting, public vote. Everybody got to speak their mind, but I felt we could have had a little more transparency in the development process.
John, is that a recommendation you would also share?
Well, again, you folks, the league has provided to the commissioners a recommended change. I like that. I support that change. And that's actually has the option of just oversight, but it also has the option of a civilian group doing it, if you will.
And that's really a decision that this bunch of commissioners will be making, of which you will be a part.
Well, the next one won't be done to 21 because it's a year after the census.
Right.
So it could be another board.
Okay. Well, do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I would. My sense is it would be better for the group like the league to be the oversight. One of the little things I've learned is you can't stop politicians from being politicians. It's probably a mistake to try. Let them be politicians
But keep it out in
and
the
hold them
open.
accountable. And so, if you see something, wow, the community really needs to see blank, then your group is in a position to make everyone know. If you let everyone in the community know and they say, you know what, I don't mind it one bit, let's just go with it, then you've done your job. So to me, the real benefit would be having a group like the league in an oversight role if this happens, if we do this again.
Well, thank you.
One last thing I would like to mention, and I've talked to you about this before, Roberta, this entire program, if you will, is about gerrymandering. Gerrymandering has certain connotations. We didn't actively try to do what gerrymandering first. And in fact, when we finished, we had 3 wards that were had a balance towards the Democratic side. 3 wards had a balance toward the Republican side, and 1 ward was pretty much a toss-up. So it doesn't fit that definition. I agree with Don. It's still not. It wasn't the best process it could be.
Well, I do appreciate your candid conversations of how the ward lines were drawn in Radnor, and how we might improve this process in the future. And now I'd like to continue our conversation with Elaine, as she chaired the commissioners when this came before them and the kind of discussion
Good. Thank
they
you.
had.
Thanks.
So thank you so much.
You bet.
Now, it's great to be back again at Radnor Studio One with our Commissioner Elaine Schaefer, and we're going to be talking some more about gerrymandering. It's local. Elaine, you were sitting at the dais when the new maps were brought to you. What do you recall happened when those commissioners saw the ward map?
Well, the public part of the process, after the subcommittee had gone back and forth and come up with their recommended version, that was presented in a Board of Commissioners meeting and advertised and posted. And it was an ordinance form, so when you have an ordinance, you have to introduce it in one meeting, and then you have time for everyone, the public, to consider it, and then you pass it in another meeting. So when it was introduced, there was some spirited debate between some of the commissioners about their satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the recommended 5C version that came out of the committee, because there were still some issues that, it wasn't a perfect map. And some of, I enjoyed listening to Don and John talk about the process. But there were definitely big changes in some of the wards, and there was a perception by some that Ward 3 had been drawn so that it would be more difficult for Luke to win the election, but which may have been true. But it was, I think, more a byproduct and not a purpose, because Ward 4 was also drawn more difficult for the incumbent to stay in. My ward lost two of its very Democratic neighborhoods and became far more Republican, which again, I don't think was a purpose. It was a byproduct. And that's going to happen. You're never going to have the same exact partisan mix in every ward if you make changes. So there was some upset about that. There was some upset about the way Wayne, the downtown Wayne area, was divided up and not all in one ward. But that there are pros and cons to that, because if you have the pro can be if you have two representatives for one area, you get more representation. Great. The con is if you have two representatives for one area and they don't agree, you basically cancel each other out. So that's another thing just to consider. I mean, these are difficult issues, and as I said, you're never going to get the perfect map. But the majority of the board at that point was satisfied with the 5C version.
So was it basically a partisan vote when it came down to the final decision, or do you recall that?
I don't think so. It was a 5-2 vote. I do remember that. And I think at that point we had, so there must have been a Republican. I don't remember who it was, but there must have been a Republican who supported it.
Well, as you know, we all continue to live with the map which was chosen, 5C, and it's been lasting through a couple of elections, and some of it's good, some of it's bad, and some of it looks just plain ugly. So do you have any of the other experiences you would like to share that may not have been covered by Don or John earlier?
Well, I mean, in looking back, certainly there are things I would have done differently. And I'm sure that the next board who has to tackle this, having learned from this process, will hopefully do differently. But we did really the best we could. And I think the map that came out was an improvement. Obviously, the numbers were better. And we did succeed. One of the major problems was breaking up the dorms. And we did succeed in doing that and making it more even throughout the wards who the dorms were going to be in, because that was really a big problem. Not to simplify it, but if you have 2/3 of your voters as really ghost voters in any off-year election, then your ward can be commandeered by a very small number of people, and it's not good democracy.
So as we look to the 2020 census coming on and the recent developments on our college campuses, do you believe they will impact the voting wards again?
Well, if we believe the planning for the Villanova campus, those dorms, the new dorms on Lancaster Avenue, will be filled with, I forget how many, 1,400 students. And that will significantly, the wards are only 4,500 people each. So you add all those people into a ward and it's going to make it lopsided. So yes, there will be some redrawing need to be done at that point. And again, even though there are 1,500 new people, it doesn't necessarily mean you're getting 1,500 new voters, because they're very poor, historically poor voting records in non-presidential years.
So basically, the ward division is based on their record of not voting in elections other than presidential ones.
Well, it's not that's not an official parameter, but in trying to, if your goal is to achieve good representation of your residents, you have to take that into account. That this phenomenon is happening. That the population is very skewed when you have a populated dorm.
And as you say, they're residents only for a short period of time.
Right.
Where most of the people who live in Radnor tend to stay more than 4 years.
Yes, and then some.
As you know, at the time the map was voted on by the commissioners, the League addressed concerns about the lack of transparency because the subcommittee meetings were held behind closed doors. There were no minutes kept, so it's hard for the public to determine what was happening. And proposals have been made for independent commissions or by transparencies, and I think what you've said is you agree that we need a little more transparency.
Absolutely. And I would even say, ultimately, the commissioners have to vote on it because it's an ordinance. But taking it out of the political process altogether with a commission, I think would be helpful.
Well, on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Radnor and the citizens of Radnor, I wish to express my appreciation for your willingness to share with us your experience and opinions. Most significantly, you've helped us learn about how things have been done in Radnor in the past and how they might be improved in the future. So, yes, we understand gerrymandering is local. It brings with it implications for elections at our state and national level. And we are most grateful for you, our audience on Radnor Studio 21, for this opportunity to share and learn more about our processes in Radnor Township. As you know, watching will help you continue to learn, and change can then happen. It's up to you to help our democracy work better. Thank you.